I'm going to start the day by throwing a few stats at you guys. And these are stats that I found in the last year. I have not updated them, and I'm going to tell you why. They all came from some CDC reports, which I used to use quite frequently to kind of look at basically kind of state of health. Every year, there's a huge report that gets put out. Like for like 2020, we should have seen 2021's report sort of mid to late years, so say third quarter, because it takes that long to compile things. But I think out of there, I think there's a huge, I'm just going to say there's some questions, I think, with regard to the integrity of what information is being reported and how it's been reported. So I'm going to leave anything off the table prior to when I did this stuff, which would have been back in about 2019, going into 2020. And so I don't want to make any assumptions, but I would say most of these numbers have probably increased. So I'm going to throw them at you. I don't know. That's just my best guess based on kind of how things have been going. But here you go. Excess weight now accounts for 1 in 3 deaths among middle-aged people in the U.S. each year. Heart disease is still the number one cause of death in the United States, more than anything else. Over 600,000 people die of heart attacks each year.
The Atkins diet, dude.
Oh, man. Like, we got into the whole COVID thing and how many people had died or whatever, because of COVID, yet this was an underlying statistic.
That number was small for me, to be honest. I hope people don't take that the wrong way, but that number was small to call up. That's
what got, so this is what's been reported previously with regard to just heart attacks, 600,000 a year. That's 1 billion people worldwide suffer from diabetes and obesity. 1 billion.
Are they going to, pull back on sugar? Are they going to ban sugar?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, is there a vaccine for eating too much?
Yeah.
I don't know, but 50 million people in the U.S. suffer from autoimmune diseases. These are diagnosed, and this is what's been reported. And those are going to be things like Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid condition, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, MS, which is that's a big one. That one's a miserable one. Crohn's disease, and basically what that equates to is about 1 in every 6 Americans. So think about that.
And these are just people that have been diagnosed. Some people have no idea. This is their life.
And they're living. We talked about this a little bit on another podcast, which is like knowing what healthy feels like. They don't even know that they're that sick or that they feel that shitty yet because they don't have anything to compare it to. 1/3 of Americans suffer from high blood pressure. We already knew about that, which contributes to almost 800,000 strokes every year. Now, I'm laughing about that because it's like we don't hear about any of this, right? But every one of us knows somebody that's had some kind of an ischemic issue, and a lot of those ischemic issues can be stroke-related as well. So 800,000, I mean, that's a massive number. Go back to the 600,000 people that die from the heart attacks, 800,000 strokes a year. That's massive. There's a big one. Depression is now, or was, the leading cause of disability in the United States, affecting more than 120 million people worldwide. So that's the world number. And at the time of this study, suicide held the number 10 spot in the leading cause of death. Number 10, right? All the things. I believe actually, well, I don't want to say something out of turn, but I have to believe in the last couple of years that number has also increased.
Absolutely.
I'll go on. At least 65% of all adults in the U.S. are currently taking at least one prescription medication. I mean, if you think about that, I mean, 65%, I think it's higher than that.
It's more than one.
And here's the more interesting stat that I found, which that adults that are currently taking 3 prescription medications, they face a 70% chance of being increased to at least 6. I'm going to say it again. 6 medications should they move from their current 3 medications to 4. And we all know how this works. So if you're on like a blood pressure medication, you're on a statin.
Diuretic.
To balance that out. And you're already on 3. As soon as you go to 4, expect that you're going to be at least 6. And I think every one of us in the United States for sure knows somebody in their family that has not maybe taken very good care of their health or has found themselves in an unfortunate situation where they just have a bottle full of, or a counter full of bottles or pills or one of those little, pill containers to have to keep up with on a regular basis. I just wanted to bring that to the table because today I wanted to talk about this concept of inflammation and more specifically, I'm seeing a lot of shit going on out there with regard to, you know, inflammatory foods, the things that are going to piss you off, the things that are going to kill you. And I think, you know, what ends up happening is people start making these lists of I can't eat this and I can't eat that. They're confused, right? And it frustrates me because, well, I thought I wasn't supposed to eat that because that's going to cause problems or it causes fucking cancer or something, you know, something kind of ridiculous. And so they have this list of foods that they absolutely will eat and this other list of foods they absolutely don't eat, without taking into consideration a lot of context that goes into, well, what are the foods that you're not eating versus what you are eating? And so I wanted to basically step back and talk to people today and talk to you guys today about sort of how to stay away from inflammatory foods. And obviously, you know, people are going, oh, fuck, we're having the inflammation conversation again. Well, the reason I brought the stats to the table are what we know with regard to these diseases, these things that are happening across worldwide. It's not just the United States, but worldwide. But I'll try and keep it local. There's a root to all of this, and it starts with chronic inflammation, right? And that is this ongoing process of your body being under this stress to where it creates an inflammatory response, and that's a systemic inflammatory response. It's not just joints. It's not just, you know, around your heart. It's not just in your gut. It happens everywhere in your blood vessels, in your neural system, right? And all the things that control all the daily goings on within your body. And it's that chronic inflammation that creates or is the root of a lot of these problems. And almost all of them can be traced back to lifestyle and diet.
Yep.
And so again, I'm seeing a lot of stuff going on with this anti-inflammatory business, particularly now as we're moving into the winter months, because people want to avoid, you know, they're concerned about their immune systems for lots of reasons, as they should be. They should have an appropriate concern for their immune system and making sure they're taking care of it. And so all of a sudden, this inflammatory food thing is coming up. So I just gave you a lot of stats. I mean, thoughts on that right out of the gate, guys? Like, just, and again, these are, say, 2019 stats.
I mean,
are you surprised?
Not at all.
No, I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. But those numbers are way too high. And I think where I'm at right at this moment, I'm sitting here thinking, so what do we do about it? That's a big undertaking.
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, here's you just used the word we. I think it's less, you actually break it down to a step further, and I think it's what do I do about it, right? What am I doing as an individual versus what do we do collectively? Because there is no we until the individuals start taking this start being concerned with this, start taking action.
Yes, we can go down. No, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, like, and this is going to take us off to a different road, and we don't have to go there, but at the same time, so yes, each individual can make a change in their life and the people that they interact with and stuff, but still, when it comes to stress and it comes to access and when it comes to, you know, how our food is produced, at some point, like, it starts at the top. You have to have some kind of movement, and it's not going to be, it can be one person who starts it, but at the same time, like, who's in control? Yeah,
I fully believe that one person can make a massive difference, and that could be you making a difference in somebody else's life, right? Or it could be one influencer that hits the nail on the head and influences 10 people, you know, to make a better decision. More of my thing is when I look at that, I'm like, God, fucking, how did we get here? Like, how does this happen? And why is it happening?
I'm so cynical.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way too. I mean, I don't know how you feel, Jeff.
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised with the sedentary lifestyle, the way that we live our life. Everyone wants shit quick. They don't want to cook. The food industry has done a horrible job at providing quality nutrients. You buy something in a package, it sucks, bottom line. I don't care what it is. I don't care what it says on the package. If it's shelf life and in a box, it sucks. And that's what everybody's eating. So when you talk about...
Keep going. I want to come back to that.
I thought maybe my mic was cutting out.
No.
So, like, you know, to preserve these things, we won't go down, there's a lot of sodium, right? So you hear all these doctors, don't eat salt, don't eat, salt. They're not talking about salting your food. Like, you cannot salt your food as much as what you're getting in these fucking packages. You're eating maybe 6 grams of sodium a day, right? If I was salting my food like a normal person,
you would never put that
never,
concentrated
and it's good for you. You need salt.
Right.
You need salt.
That's a good example. Yeah.
So that's where I sit, where I think that the food industry has done a really shitty job, and it's not their job.
And it's not just the food industry, because I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm starting to get heated because I know what my kid eats at lunch. If she gets school lunch.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, the last day of school, I didn't send you this, but they had pizza that was served at school, but the slices were individually packed, and the pieces of pizza that other students didn't pick up to have for lunch, they let the other kids take it home. So she brought home like 4 to 6 things of individually wrapped pieces of pizza. This is what they're serving kids at school.
Is this the Michelle Obama food pyramid
I
thing?
don't know, man.
Eli, do you know?
Look,
no, you don't know?
I think, but you make a good point. Whether it's the particular person, I don't really care to talk about, but I will say this, like, as soon as you start getting government and things involved in these things get a little shitty. And you mentioned another word, which is industry. There is a food industry, right? And so that is part of it. And I think, basically we've devolved, right? We've evolved from, in terms of how we get food in people's hands and what it looks like, and keeping shelf life and making sure people get fed. Those are good things.
Absolutely.
But there's been a cost to this.
Yes.
And part of the cost is obviously our health, and part of it, the cost is, to your point, being lazy.
It's not canned foods anymore.
Well,
right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, like, let's be real. Like, we canned foods.
It wasn't fresh food.
Yeah, we salted meat to save, it was not shitty quality food in a package.
Right. So what you have now is you just have things that have been overly processed to serve the greater whole.
Yeah, your body will use more energy trying to digest that food than you will get nutrients from it.
In a lot of cases, but I can go to the store now. I think it's evolved even a little bit. I can go to the store now and I can find things that are in a package that have very little processing done to them that I could reasonably bring in. And again, I don't want to get too far in the rabbit hole in this with regard to nutrient density, nutrient quality for somebody that's eating shit anyways, right? If you're going to McDonald's every day, I'd much rather have you go to Trader Joe's and get a prepackaged meal or whatever and eat that for a lot of reasons. Label for label, starting there. But no, you're making a good point. And so we've evolved our ability to get food in the hands of people that need it in places that they need it. But at the same time, I think we've devolved as people, and we've become used to this, right? So we don't have to work at it. We don't have to think about it. I find that interesting. And what it's done is, like, there's basically 50% of Americans get their calories from processed foods right now. So that's, I think, almost proof to the point of, like, people have just gotten really lazy. They've gotten their heads wrapped around and gotten way too used to the convenience piece. That's become a little bit of a problem. On top of that, because we're so much better at getting this food out there, and there's so many of these options, and this industry has grown so much, the soil for which we're growing some of this food in, most of it for that matter, comes from severely depleted sources, right? Soil sources, because we've over-farmed it and we keep using the same things. They don't
replenish the soil at all.
No, we don't rotate crops like we did, and there's a higher demand for the higher yielding, lower nutrient value crops, corn, soybeans, those kinds of things. We'll talk about that a little bit. So look, no matter how you slice it, we know that soil's been depleted. Like, there are ways around this, but it's gone on for long enough that we just need to be aware of this. That leads into other things, but also the chemicals that we use on our food. Those things have evolved, and we've found times, in times where shit's really, really dangerous and really costly to the human body, and we've changed it up. But those are things that go into this process, right? Or processing of food. We sit too much and we don't move enough. You already mentioned, kind of you used the word movement earlier, but this is a contributing factor to kind of where our healths are. We're chronically overstressed. For a lot of different reasons. I think we'll hit on that a little bit. We do that a lot on this show, but we don't sleep enough. We work out too much sometimes. We don't work out enough. We're constantly attached to our screens and all the terrible stuff that's happening in the world. So that all adds up, leads right into not getting enough sleep. And then, I already mentioned sort of the exercise piece has become like this is the answer to being unfat, if you will, which is only a small part it's a significant but small part of the greater solution. So it's just this confluence of factors which has led to this poor health that we're sitting in, and the combination of all the things we just talked about leads to inflammation. So I want to it leads to this chronic inflammation, which can then create these underlying metabolic disorders or issues. I think the thing rather than lining it all out with eat this and not that, I think it's better to maybe this is the way I like to educate people. I'm like, okay, there's a few basic things that we want to pay attention to, right? And if you do this and you did nothing else, you would feel significantly better and likely see significant improvements in everything from the way you look to lab results and blood tests and, just basic blood tests. From a cholesterol perspective, from a cardiovascular or metabolic perspective, you would see things. And we know that there's basically three big culprits in all of the things we just talked about when it comes to diet. Lifestyle is a thing, right? But when it comes to diet, and you could kind of break them all down to three basic things. You have our consumption of refined sugars, right? And we'll come back to this. We'll line all these out. The other one is going to be the refined grains that we eat, right? And the amounts that we eat. And we'll talk about the issues with those. And the other one is the highly refined seed oils that we're also eating. So if I had to look at like what were foods that I would maybe sometimes eliminate or all the time eliminate, those are the things that I'm going to be looking at and try to limit in my diet. And I think if you gave people some general recommendations around those without fear mongering of eat the wheat and die, because the gluten is evil and it will kill you, or sugar is going to give you diabetes. Those aren't true. Those aren't factual statements. They can be really bad for some people, but at the same time, that's not the greater whole. And by instilling the fear, right, and giving them the absolute, you're creating problems. For sure. And it's not making anything better. So I thought maybe we could kind of just carve some things out there with regard to kind of how we handle things. And I want to start with the sugar thing because that's usually the one that comes up first. Mm-hmm. As it relates to inflammation, to start this out, first off, I am no doctor, neither is anybody here at the table. Officially, actually.
Well, not an MD.
CeCe has a PhD, but not in bio or med or anything like that. I just want to say, like this, where we're coming from here is based on basic knowledge. This is not anything that's hidden that you have to deeply research. If you care about it and you want to get into it, it's right there. It's free. Yep. You can go find it in places from really great resources. And we've had the good fortune of being in this industry in order to sit with, talk with, meet with, study with, all those kinds of things with the people that do put a lot of effort and research into this. I'm not a research scientist, so you're not going to hear me quoting a bunch of things. I am simply giving you the knowledge that's been transferred over time from people that have done all of those things. That's all. And in my own experience, that's the position I'm coming from on this. And I think so before the fucking trolls come out and go, well, like cite your resources and whatever else. If you like me to, I could give you hundreds of them, but you're not going to look at them. You're just being a dick. So I'm not going to waste my time. That said, I want to talk about the sugar thing as it relates to inflammation, because I will say excessive sugar intake is pro-inflammatory. Mm-hmm. So I want to break this down and why. So first off, there is no detailed evidence anywhere, to my knowledge, and this is based on meta-analysis across many, many platforms and many, many studies. There is I'm going to repeat it, knowledge or research that shows that when calories are equated, sugar, the different types of sugars, refined versus, say, natural. So I'll say refined like sucrose, right? The sugar you find on your table, like table sugar, compared to fructose, which would be like what you'd find in a piece of fruit. When calories are equated, when given the same amounts of sugar, that there's any more of an inflammatory response from either of those sugars. Mm-hmm. You can do all kinds of studies with rats and things like that, and we've seen that where they'll give them a huge bolus of sugar, and then they'll test inflammatory markers like C-reactive proteins. There's a couple other ones they can look at there, but that one being the major one. And they'll see an increase, right, in inflammation, but it's not over a long period of time. And it's the same for both types of sugar. So I want to be clear that what we're saying is like eating refined sugar doesn't directly cause inflammation, but there are a lot of things that it does do, and I want to break into that. So I've been talking a lot. Let's just talk about what happens when you intake sugar. What does the body do?
So your body spikes insulin, right? The reason why it spikes insulin is this is the mechanism in which it acts on the cell to open up floodgates for said carbohydrates and proteins to enter the cell, right? Mm-hmm. It's a storage molecule. That's what it helps us do. Over time, right, it can become desensitized. Like we're talking chronic, like every day you're eating this huge amount of sugar and that's in your diet. Well, the cell will start to retract some of these sites. You'll have insulin that's not able to act on the cell, and sugar stays in the bloodstream instead of getting where it needs to go, which ultimately ends up being a huge issue with arteries and, the whole body. This is where we start getting the systemic inflammation from that.
The insulin is like a key, which helps to unlock receptor sites in your body so that your body can utilize the blood sugar, the sugar that's in your blood for other chemical reactions in the body.
So when it's unable to do that because you've put too much in there and your body is now, because you've continually saturated your body with this sugar, your body can downregulate its insulin response. Yeah. And so I don't want to get too far into the hormone, but by downregulating it, that creates a whole cascade of other things.
Produces more insulin, right, to act on the cell, and then you get the...
Insulin is inflammatory, right? We know that. Like, it does create an inflammatory response. So too much or too little neither is good. But the insulin response is inflammatory. That's what I was saying before. Like, you eat anything, it's going to create an inflammatory response. It's to what degree and what position are you in from a already systemic inflammatory position. So I guess what I'm saying is like, if you're already that person that's been, a total mess and has these other metabolic conditions, you continuing to eat sugar in excessive amounts is only going to pile onto this. It's going to pile on. So that's one point. The other thing I think it's important to note here in terms of what is very inflammatory is adipose tissue. The more fat you have on your system, the more inflammation you're going to have. That is facts, right? That's just science. So going back to the sugar thing and how that relates to adipose tissue, well, sugar does all kinds of other things, right? It shuts down, first off, it overstimulates the reward centers, right? Everybody knows that. I mean, get that piece of chocolate cake in front of you and tell me how you feel while you're eating it and after you're immediately following. I feel great. Turns on it pushes all the buttons, all the lights and the signals and the levers and the switches get put. It's like sex, right? It's the same type of thing, right? It hits all of those receptors and it makes you feel good. Actually, like opioids, there's an opioid response within the brain. Hormones get released, things like that. So eating excess sugar, again, doesn't directly impact the inflammation, but overeating does, right? And over time, then obviously overeating can be directly related to the increase in adipose tissue, which then becomes chronically inflammatory. So again, this is why we pull sugar out as one of those things. I mean, I think there's some other factors there as we get into it. Like you guys were already mentioning the insulin response, that being an incredible one, or probably one of the most important ones. And your body's inability to deal with the sugar that you're putting in there. And then what that does at the gut level. So, and creating gut dysbiosis. And that is if you've got too much sugar in there, and by the way, there's evidence to show that like putting some of these artificial sweeteners and things like in there can also upset that gut dysbiosis. That can create, again, gut dysbiosis being your gut becomes inflamed because there are bacterias, there are enzymes and things that are out of whack in there. They create, for lack of a better term, like an opening in the cheesecloth, which is your intestinal lining, and allows proteins to then cross the barrier and get into the bloodstream, things that aren't supposed to be there. Your body has to launch an immune response to go out and fight these things, and that is inflammatory. So again, the excess sugar intake is a problem. And so when we talk about like, hey, how do you reduce inflammation through, eating, a diet that and participating in a lifestyle that can reduce that amount, there's no such thing as an like a non-inflammatory diet or,
so glad you said that.
Yeah, this just doesn't exist.
It's individual as well, right?
Right.
Because there's some things in, I know the big thing recently was turmeric. And it's been big for a while, but there's some things in turmeric, like the root, like that can cause inflammatory in your body. But then people have taken turmeric for what? anti-inflammatory properties.
Right.
So it's pretty funny when you start looking at all these things. There are most of the things that we talk about that, we pull from one thing has this. Well, it also can have multiple other interactions in the body.
Yeah, I mean, and so there's a little bit of a list here without going too far into the rabbit hole, but mineral imbalances. We already talked about the blood pressure, or the blood sugar levels. Our immune defense, our immune response. Again, we already talked about like what happens if you've upset the gut biota, right? We now have a leaky gut, those kind of things. It interferes with absorption of protein. That's not good because we know we need that, and a lot of people struggle with getting enough as a whole. And effectively, when we start getting into it, the bottom line is this intestinal permeability or this leaky gut syndrome that so many people suffer from. It's only going to exacerbate that when we take in excess sugar, which is very easy to do when we look at refined sugar, like your high fructose corn syrup and things that are added to foods. Sorry. It would be better to onboard things, it would be better to onboard things like fruits, right, that have natural sugars in there, but also are coming with phytochemicals, including minerals and vitamins and fiber and things like that can help your body go through the processes, as you mentioned, Jeff, that it's supposed to be going through. So sugar in and of itself doesn't necessarily create the inflammation, not directly. But we've just mentioned a whole laundry list of things that it will do. So reduce your sugar intake today, I guarantee you in a couple of days, you're going to feel and be performing a lot better.
For sure.
So next thing would be industrial seed oils. And I mean, so go back to what we were saying before in terms of increasing shelf life and longevity of foods this is where this came from. So there's an interesting story behind this whole thing. And I love this story because it just tells you kind of how wild things are and how things evolve the way you do. So when we talk about seed oils, or highly processed seed oils, we're talking about things that have literally been modified by human hands so that we can consume them.
Yeah.
Right? You would not be able to consume them. Well, you could. You could literally swallow the things that they came from. Cotton seeds, rape seeds, which is where canola oil comes from, safflower, those things. You could swallow those things, but you're not necessarily going to it's going to be more like fiber, right? Yep. It's going to go right through. Your body's not going to be able to digest to break it down into the fats that are provided through the seed oils themselves when we buy them on the shelves, like vegetable oils, for example, right? So sorry, if we're going the other direction, like what are some of the more healthier fats? Well, we know about these. These are things that have been in a diet for a long, long time, like olive oils, like coconut oils, ghee, butter. Those are things that are very easily digested. And I mean, if you look back just sort of evolutionary, process, those are things that our bodies.
I think tallow is like the first, like that's
lard. Yeah. So you got lard and tallow, right? Lard being, lard being that which comes from like the pig or pork, and then tallow, which is basically beef. Which comes from any other kind of animal, if you will. Yeah. Those are long-standing fats that we've taken in for a long time. So what's interesting about that is that lard or rendered pork fat is actually what was used to make soap for a very, very long time, right?
You know what? I think I heard that and I forgot about that.
Yeah, so that's
Fight Club.
Yeah, Fight Club. So if you've seen the Fight Club, then you know that they were making this amazing soap out of human fat.
So
right?
good.
All right, so great movie. Gross concept, but great movie. But the bottom line is there's these guys called Procter & Gamble, which is still a name that's around today. They were making soap. They were making a lot of money, and they figured out that they figured out a process by which they could use seed oil in order to use their soap or to make their soap. And the seeds that they were using were the unwanted seeds from cotton manufacturing. So cotton seeds for a long time were looked at as a toxic waste, right? So for them, they're like, dude, if we can get oil from the cotton seeds, which people are just dying to get rid of, with all the cotton that's manufactured in the United States, we could take that oil and we could make that into the soap. We could use that in the soap, save us a lot of money. We could basically get the stuff for free, increase profits, blah, 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 right? I mean, you see where this is going.
For sure.
Yep.
So over time, that's what happened. Well, then during that process and of discovery, they figured out, well, we can actually break this down into oil that we could use for cooking, right? Vegetable oil. And that then turned into part of the thing that we'll talk about here when we talk about these seed oils is they're highly unstable, right? Meaning they will go rancid, right? Very easily. Or when you heat them up, they start to change their chemical properties very easily.
They release very highly oxidative stress properties.
Correct.
Which wreak havoc on your body.
And that's where a lot of these inflammatory properties are. But that said, so what they figured out was like, well, if we hydrogenate this stuff, we add an extra hydrogen molecule to it, we can make this thing called Crisco, right? Which makes it uber stable. I can put it into a can. I can leave it on a shelf for literally 1,000 years, and I can still make cookies, cakes, pies, whatever else. I can put it in food and leave that food on the shelf because it's the fat that's going rancid on the shelf. And so I've now got a food preservative at the same time. Well, lo and behold, now it makes its way into our regular diet with the industrialization of food. And here we are now about 100 years later, 120 years, this happened, I believe, in the early 1900s. Now, here we are, right? This is the majority of the oils that we're taking into our system from a dietary perspective. We were not built to fucking eat this shit, right? So you can argue this with me all day long. Like, if you have to do that much processing to it to get it to where it is, you can see where there's going to be problems. And the problem with the seed oils is because they're unstable, and they have to be heated at the beginning. So two things. One, they have to be heated to a very high temperature in order to extract this oil, which makes it very unstable, which at the same time produces a high amount of what you were mentioning, these oxidative properties, omega-6 fatty acids. They then make their way, then makes its way into your body over time. You can see where this can be an issue. So when we talk to people about, hey, stay away from refined seed oils, this is what we're talking about and the reasons why. And so once it's in there, Jeff, I mean, I don't know if you want to continue with the oxidative properties, but I mean, this is, I think, what people really want to know. Like, I just told the story, but it's the oxidative process that really wreaks havoc.
Yeah, well, you have these chemicals that go in there and they start wreaking havoc on the body, like oxidative stress, right? That's just stress due to the body. It can happen naturally from running long distance, whatever, right? But these things literally come in and degrade the cell. They wrap around and then they stay in your bloodstream and they bounce off. They create inflammation in the arteries, right? Glycated bodies, stuff like that, which is fat wrapped around a sugar molecule.
Can create atherosclerosis too, right?
Exactly.
As far as one of the outcomes.
Yeah, they're
from too much omega-6s and not having an equal balance as well with the omega-3. So from my understanding, I think these are two types of fats that your body does need, but it doesn't make these omega fats. And so I'm not saying that we need to consume these, these oils or anything, but, you and I had this conversation a while ago, how they're in red meat. Omega-6, it's just there.
Yeah.
And so, we're not saying don't eat red meat, but, you have to find that equal balance of getting enough omega-6s and omega-3s to counterbalance then the omega-6s. But yeah, you definitely don't want to consume these seed oils because, of all of the processing that it goes through just to get the product.
Along the line with that processing is things to not leave out are, there are perfumes actually added to the seeds to the processing because of the stench that the processing of it puts off. So they actually change the way it smells because it would probably be inedible otherwise.
And fragrances is a human endocrine disruptor anyway. So,
they are. Like, that's actually a great topic when we talk about deodorants and
hair
lotions and hair products and toothpaste and things like that. That can wreak havoc. It's probably for the hormone talk more than anything. But yes, there are additives. There are chemical additives that are added, again, to help to stabilize it as well as get it through the process. And let's not forget about any chemicals that may have been added to it in the growing process. Like, so cotton in and of itself is not edible, right? But the seed oil, they've made it edible, but I can tell you, having been involved in the agricultural business a little bit and spending a little time around cotton fields, oh my God, the pesticides and herbicides they use on fucking cotton are scary. If you were going to eat cotton, it would kill you, right? It's scary. So that stuff just gets passed down through the line and goes through the processing. And again, I'm not saying that to scare people. I'm just saying
that's just a matter of fact.
You know, like at what point does it wind up in your body and whose body does it wind up in? Well, everybody's an individual. I just don't like taking that risk, right? So if I can mitigate getting that kind of shit in my system, I'm going to in the ways that I can that are reasonable and make the most sense for me. So that's also something to be thinking about. But to your point, I mean, we're talking about this balance of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. And what you were articulating there is these are not things our body can manufacture. We have to get them from the outside. These are polyunsaturated fatty acids, right? You guys you may see this in writing or like on the side of your food container. Somebody might be trying to put, it's balanced in PUFAs, or whatever. So that'd be omega-6 to omega-3. But because of the foods that we eat and how we operate now, and again, because of the depletion of soil and things, we're likely to get way more omega-6s than we get omega-3s. So supplementing with omega-3s and eating foods that are higher in omega-3s can help balance that balance out. Now, without getting too far down into the rabbit hole, you already mentioned beef. Poultry as well has a high amount of arachidonic acid, which is part of the omega-6 process. So, again, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, but if you're eating a high protein diet, let's just say, or an elevated protein diet, I don't want to say high because that's relative, right? You're probably going to have high levels of omega-6. And so supplementing with omega-3s is extremely important just because you're eating meats. Now, one way to try and mitigate this, and this one's can be a little bit tougher, is eat the grain-fed, or don't eat the grain-fed meat.
There we go.
Don't eat the grain-fed meat. Eat the grass-fed stuff that is not treated with hormones and things like that, because we're going, again, just like the cottonseed, we're not passing it down through the system. I mean, that meat is basically, if they're being fed grains that have been treated with this stuff, again, that already have high amounts of omega-6 in them, they're basically just like a storage facility.
Yeah.
That ribeye is just a storage facility for that stuff. And again, you're going to get that stuff in your system anyway, even if you're eating the grass-fed stuff. It's just at what concentrations and whatever else. That's why we encourage people to eat the grass-fed, organic, non-hormone treated stuff, whenever possible. So, but our westernized diet does not, is, again, going back to the industrialization of food and all the good things that's done, it's also become a little bit problematic. The big thing being, like, they're highly unstable, right? So as soon as you start cooking with them or heating them up, or when you cook, inevitably you're going to be heating up the oil, right? They can go rancid, so they have chemicals added to them. The heating it up creates linoleic acid, right? Linoleic acid can become an issue, in our system with regard to and that is very pro-inflammatory. So going back to, like the why and why not, what should you watch out for? When you're eating these processed foods or processed seed oils specifically, you're eating you're putting a very pro-inflammatory food in your system, regardless of what your current level of health is. So whether that's eating from the chicken fryer, or the French fries or whatever else. Not that you can't ever eat that stuff. Just understand the volume of food that you do based on your current situation, or you do eat that way based on your current situation, could be really driving up this inflammatory response. And inflammation is the root of all metabolic disease, which we already covered is a big fucking problem. So anyhow, anything else you guys want to say about seed oils?
No, just if you're going to use olive oil, just look at the source of where you're getting it from, because a lot of it's a 50-50 blend of rapeseed and olive oil. They'll cut it. That, and they say go with the cold press, right? Yeah. So staying away from heat. There. Yeah. And then also making sure that it's like in a dark glass bottle. Yep, absolutely.
Which keeps it from spoiling, right?
Exactly.
So extra virgin olive oil. Mind where it's being sourced from, to Jeff's point. The darker bottles is probably a smart way to go, because it's going to be, if it's coming from Italy, right, and it's or Greece, and it's it's being transported, and it's sitting in a store somewhere under that's why the dark glass bottles exist. It's a good way to go, and go with glass versus plastic. Always. We'll talk about the plastic on the hormone talk some other time. Coconut oil. It was interesting when I was a kid, like coconut oil was taboo. Yep. Stay away from coconut oil.
I never even heard of coconut oil in the Midwest when I was a kid.
I remember my mom going, we cannot eat anything with coconut oil in it.
Yeah. We saved the bacon grease.
Yeah, they still haven't.
Right. So coconut oil, butter and ghee, which are, natural sources. Again, be careful where that stuff's being sourced from, or at least be mindful.
Shout out Kerrygold.
There's this thing called cultured oil, which is like a new type of cooking oil, which actually comes from a fermentation process. I don't want to get down, too into that.
I can't say I'm versed on
too much. Yeah, I'm not either, but I've not even had it, so I don't know what it tastes like. But I've read about it. Curious, but I like to keep things.
Is this like biodiesel?
Yeah,
I don't want it. Don't want it.
Jeff heard my story about biodiesel, putting it in the Mercedes. I'm like, I ain't doing it. Pastured lard, we already talked about that. Pasture fed lard, or that's going to be what's coming from your pigs, and then pastured tallow that would be coming from whatever else is out there.
Beef,
duck fat's an excellent
really
source.
Good.
Again, those are all different. Those are all alternatives if you want to go.
And they all have a different flavor profile.
Well, that's another thing I was going to say about the processed seed oils. They don't even fucking taste good.
Oh,
like they don't taste good. There's not like they're almost flavorless, or they don't taste good at all, particularly after they've been cooked. You can taste.
Like you've had regular hash browns before, right?
Yep.
Like that is all just vegetable oil. You're not tasting potato
most of the time.
at that point.
Most of the time, unless they're cooking it with butter, right?
Which is very rare.
Which is very rare. So yeah, you're tasting it. It doesn't even taste that good, but you get good olive oil on a meal, or in some vegetables or whatever else. I mean, I know some Sicilians out there that are practically bathing the shit.
Oh, and they look great.
It's everywhere. All right, so moving on from that, last thing to talk about would be in terms of foods to avoid. And again, this would be, I like to look at this, again, I think going back, foods to think about eliminating, right? Or eat rarely, or just pull back in your diet, and you'll feel better immediately. And one of those is the refined grains. We've already covered a lot of things with regard to pesticides, herbicides, depletion of the soil, and how those impact the body from an inflammatory response. Well, grains fit right into that, right? And a lot of people eat a lot of grain. I mean, I don't eat a lot of grain, and it's because of the reasons we're going to talk about, but it's also because I don't feel very good when I eat too much of it. And I think it's important, just like with any of these things, there's always levels. But I found really with grain, like in the people that I've worked with over the years, and like my family, my friends, and even myself, that everybody has like a threshold. Like you can eat a little bit up to a certain amount, and then after that, like wild things kind of start happening, right? Some people can't get anywhere near it. They're very sensitive to it. There's an intolerance to it that, they feel sick. They actually get physically sick. It starts to show up in their skin, right? And at the epidermis level. So there's all different levels to this. And some people can be like, I can't ever touch gluten because, I'm very, very sensitive to it. But that's the thing. When you eat wheat, it's high chance you're going to get gluten. They do have gluten-free stuff out there, but a lot of studies been done on a lot of this stuff. And it's not that it has zero gluten. It just has lower levels of gluten, or a very low level of gluten, whatever the standard is, in order to be able to say, there's no gluten in this, regulated by, the USDA or whatever the case is. And I know people that have an immediate inflammatory response, particularly if you have IBS or IBD or colitis or Crohn's is another one of those. Endometriosis. I know a close friend of ours who suffers greatly. She cannot get anywhere near wheat at all. Otherwise, it creates this inflammation within her body, within her gut, and then that just immediately goes wild. So, and it can be debilitating. It puts them down for days. So again, when we're looking at wheat or we're looking at highly refined grains, we're looking at them a lot of the same ways we would look at those seed oils and even the sugar that we're refining to get into our diet. It's become highly stable, but it's not very nutrient dense. And that's not to say that eating grains is bad for you and you can't derive any value for it. I think there's a lot of value. I eat rice. That's what I can eat.
For sure.
Right?
There's just a lot of nutritional value that's been taken out because of the way that they industrialize the wheat itself, right?
That's why things are fortified.
So Dr. Ali did a really good job at explaining this one time, and I don't want to butcher it, so I'm not going to go too deep. But when you're looking at kind of a wheat the way wheat looks, they go outside and they use the husk. They don't even use anything that's viable on the inside. And then they're growing it with a bunch of glyphosate and pesticides, herbicides, like we talked about. Same thing, to keep it resistant, to keep it growing, which has all of the implications that the seed oils did, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So, and I eat rice as well.
Again, it's not that the wheat or the grain, I keep saying wheat, the grain is bad, but too much for some is relative, right? And at the same time, it does act much the same way as those refined sugars do in terms of bypassing our hormonal response to, hey, you're full. It's very easy to overeat this stuff. And I mean that from a caloric perspective.
Sure. So they're very caloric dense.
Just like sugar, it's not the sugar that's creating the inflammation, right? It's the response that the body has to the sugar that's creating the inflammation and or helping to override certain other responses that are natural, like, hey, you're full, stop fucking eating. Right. So that's one of the things. We just consume, particularly here in the West, so much flour. I mean, when you look at the ingredients on most packages now, and it's in everything. It's really tough to get away from.
And sauces and stuff too, I think.
So what do you guys think about going over people that have gluten intolerances or just they don't do well here, right? And they go to another country, Italy and all these places, and they're like, dude, I ate pasta all day, nothing. Right? So it really shows, okay, well, what's going on over there with their wheat and how are they doing it? Because obviously what we're doing is not the way.
So that's a good point. So you have GMOs, right? That is genetically modified organisms or plants, right? And those have been,
genetically fucked with.
There's so many movies or documentaries out there. People could learn about this stuff by,
scary.
It is pretty scary. Monsanto and all those kind of
That's
companies.
A whole other conversation.
But to your point, like, why do other parts of the world, why do they eat so much of this stuff and not have any issues or have way better health in general? Like Italy being, let's just use that as an example. I mean, a lot of pasta, eat a lot of meat over there too, a lot of fish, depending on what region, a lot of region, or depending on what region, a lot of wine, right? They have a different type of lifestyle, but they eat a ton of this stuff. So why is it? So there's been actually several studies on this. There was a really large meta-analysis on this done, and a guy that I really respect, his name is Dr. Michael Ruscio. It's kind of a gut doc guy.
The guy.
Yeah, he's the guy. It's great book, Healthy Gut, Healthy You. It's very
digestible. When I read it and I was like, is it going to get a little deeper? But no, it's for like normal people, dude, very good.
But they did a study, and they did studies on people that are actually had issues that had gone over there and eaten this wheat that was grown there versus what was grown in the Western world, that be it the United States, and they had zero issues. They did not have a reaction. And so it begs the question, is it the wheat, then is it the gluten, or is it what's being onboarded with the wheat and the gluten? And that being in the growing process or the lack of vitamins and minerals that are in this particular, wheat crop that's been grown or so forth? Is it other things that are being onboarded in that meal that help to, there's some questions there, but yeah, I mean, like we look at stuff like what's happening in other parts of the world with regard to wheat consumption, and they don't have nearly the same issues here. And maybe is it because there's other parts of the world that eat a lot of wheat, but they're also not obese. They're not already inflamed. So if you're a person that's already suffering from, or you've gotten yourself into a situation where you have some type of metabolic disorder and you're onboarding these pro-inflammatory foods, that being wheat in this case, like this could be a major issue for you versus somebody who has let's say a body fat percentage of somewhere between like 8 and 14%, exercises regularly,
He's picking on me.
Gets their well, it's not me, but they get regular amount of sleep, right? They're taking care of their stress mitigation and everything else. Will they have the same reaction to that wheat? That's again, there are levels and it depends. But I think circling all the way back, well, before we do that, is there anything else you guys want to say about wheat and refined grains? Because it seems to be everywhere. I mean, what does everybody bodybuilder eat for breakfast every morning? Oatmeal and eggs and egg whites, right? Some might have issues with that and just don't want to admit it, and they're farting and burping and have an upset stomach for the next 3 or 4 hours. Some people might have an insulin response or a hormonal response that makes them want to fall asleep. Some people handle it just fine. Everybody's in their own individual situation. But here's what we do know. We do know that over time, if you are inflamed already, like when I say inflamed, I just mean you have a chronic inflammation that your body's dealing with, which then is, again, the root of all these metabolic disorders. By adding that stuff in, you could be worsening your situation. So
adding fuel to the fire.
Adding fuel to the fire. It's a really good way to look at it. So if you dial it all the way back, like it's not about eliminate this, eliminate that, right? Eat more of this. I think there is a little bit of, we could all be eating a little bit more of certain things and a little bit less of other things. But if you look at the things like how much refined sugar I'm eating and where is it coming from? I mean, it's so fucking ubiquitous in the American diet. We eat like half a cup of it a day as an American people. Maybe not you or I, maybe not the people.
How many grams does that come out to?
Half a cup? I don't know how many grams are in a cup. I mean, just do some math. I have no idea.
It's over 150, right?
What's that?
It's over 100, right? 100, 150.
I don't know. Let's do it, man. I don't know.
Let's see it.
Let's figure it out.
That's important to know. That's
but
a lot.
Think about that. Like a half a cup of sugar.
That's a lot.
I mean, go home, take some white sugar and pour it into
That's 4 tablespoons.
To a measuring cup.
I think more half a cup.
100 grams.
It's 100 grams. 100 grams of refined sugar. That's a lot. That's a lot, right? So and when I say a lot, I mean lot's relative. That's fucking a lot. That's like a lot of refined. That's a lot of sugar, period. Whereas you could be getting that from other things in your diet. Like that's it's just everywhere. So start to look at what you're eating and start to eliminate how you're onboarding it. And particularly, I think a first place people could look is like, what are they drinking? Because that is that
46 grams in one Coke.
Yeah, that's 700 calorie coffee that you're drinking every day to recaffeinate during the afternoon or get your day started. I guarantee you 50% or more of those calories are coming from sugar that you're putting in it, right? So, look at how you're onboarding certain things. From the seed oils piece, if you're eating out, chances are you're eating a highly refined seed oil.
Yeah, it just is what it is. Unfortunate. Unless you're going to a really nice farm to table place and they let you know, Yeah.
So when going back to the packaged foods that you were mentioning earlier, and we were kind of debating about a little bit, these are the things that you're going to find in those packaged foods more than likely, because even if it's like a grass-fed piece of, or like a grass-fed piece of beef or pork or whatever else that's mixed with some grain and, some veggies or whatever else that you're going to be heating up in your microwave. Not that you can't ever do that, but what kind of oil is being put in there? It's likely going to have been some kind of a highly refined seed oil. And here's a personal thing, like, yeah, Jeff's looking at me with a big smile on his face. Like, I had to stop eating the food from the fucking hot bar over at
Whole Foods. Knew he was going there. Knew he was going there.
Like, you can't go there anymore,
dude.
Man.
It makes me so sick.
It's all canola oil. If you read the labels of the ingredients on all the hot foods that are at that bar, like in those particular ones, the proteins, they're all cooked in canola oil. All of them. And I couldn't figure it out for a little while. And I don't know if that was a shift or they just started using more or my body became more sensitive to it or if it was at a time when I was a little bit more inflamed. I don't know. But God, that just jacked me up. So
even thinking about it right now makes me not want to eat anything.
If you're eating out, because it's cheap, because it's available, that's likely what you're going to get. So think about that if you're eating out a lot versus if you're eating at home. And if you are eating at home, we give you a whole list of things. And on the grain side of things, like, look, usually less is better. But it depends on you and depends on how your body reacts to it. And having a high sense of awareness with regard to, if I put oatmeal in my system versus I put rice in my system versus I put quinoa in my system, how does my body respond to these things? Those are things that give you a pretty good indication right away. If you're super gassy after eating your oatmeal, probably a pretty good indication your body doesn't really like that, as an example. But at the end of the day, again, it's not about like, here's your list of foods you can always eat. Here's the ones you can't eat. It's more about, hey, if I am onboarding food, what might it be? What is it that it's coming along with? And try to keep it there. Try to keep that inflammation down and avoid these metabolic disorders.
Try to keep the scales balanced, so to speak.
Yeah, that's really all it is.
Yeah.